Have you ever wondered what it would be like to spend time with extraordinary, unforgettable wild stallions? If so, this episode is for you. I'm your host, Carol Walker, and let's get started. Welcome to the Freedom for Wild Horses podcast, the place to find out about wild horses in the American West and what you can do to help them stay wild and free. If you love wildlife, wild horses, and the freedom that they stand for, this show is for you. I'm your host, Carol Walker. Let's get started. Shaman and his family were the first wild horses I encountered on my first trip to the Pryor Mountains in 2004. Just after dawn, as I approached the horse range from Burnt Timber Road, I saw a family of wild horses running out from under the trees. There was a big reddish dun stallion with a stripe down his back and black bands known as primitive markings on his hind legs. He was bringing up the rear, and mares and foals and a young Palomino stallion. The foals played and capered together, and slowly, one by one, the mares lay down for a nap in the sun. I sat at a respectful distance, savoring the experience of being in the presence of these beautiful wild horses on the mountaintop, one of the most gorgeous places I've ever been. As I sat watching them, the band stallion, Shaman, grazed closer and closer to me. I held my breath, then realized how soft the expression was in those gorgeous eyes. I fell head over heels for this beautiful stallion that day, and he has always held a very special place in my heart. Shaman was born in 1986. I was amazed at how strong and vigorous he was, even as a 19-year-old stallion. He and Cloud always treated each other with respect when their bands came near each other. I once watched him spar with the stallion Baja over a place at the Salt Licks, then run back to his family, leaping in the air like a youngster. Sometimes he made me laugh, like the day I found he and his entire band giving my car a bath with their tongues. Shaman was a doting and indulgent father with his foals. Perhaps too indulgent for his own good with Boulder. Boulder is Cloud's son, but he was born into Shaman's band and raised by Shaman. Usually stallions kick young colts out of the family when they are 2 to 3 years old, but Boulder stayed in the family until he was 5 years old. That next year, 2007, Boulder challenged Shaman for the band, and he won them. That summer, it was heartbreaking to watch Shaman continue to follow the family, frequently skirmishing with Boulder, often fiercely fighting. He was getting more and more beat up and thinner. By the next summer, he had given up the fight and was by himself. It seemed to me that the light had gone out of Shaman's eyes. A stallion's reason for living is watching over and protecting his family. And without that family, the older stallions don't seem to last that long in the Pryor Mountains. My last encounter with Shaman was the following June in 2009. I saw him looking out at the bands going down to the waterhole, and I had a strong feeling that this would be the last time that I would see him. I was very sad and said goodbye to him silently, tears in my eyes. The week before the Pryor Mountain helicopter roundup at the beginning of September, Shaman was found beside the waterhole near Penn's cabin. I had heard of his passing the day before the roundup started, and I was so thankful that he would not have to endure the trauma of being chased down the mountain with a helicopter, but instead lived his whole life wild and free. All horses deserve to live their lives like this. I have been visiting and photographing the McCullough Peaks herd in northern Wyoming since the summer of 2004. In June of 2005, I met a plucky, curious yearling colt with the extraordinary markings, mostly white with a black head and an hourglass blaze, and one blue eye, whom I later heard was named Tecumseh. Tecumseh and his family spent their time in the Red Point area of McCullough Peaks, which is the area most easily accessible from the main road. Sometimes bands of horses would be visible from the highway, and locals and visitors have enjoyed visiting and following the activities of the horses in the herd. Locals in the BLM give names to the horses. Over time, as I came to know more and more horses in the herd, Tecumseh has always been one of my favorites. One afternoon, a big group of horses all came together to drink at a large water hole, and I watched as band stallion Tucson led his family to water, with Tecumseh right in the middle. As Tecumseh grows older, his father Tucson kicks him out of the family band, and he's on his own, hanging out with the other bachelor stallions. As he gets a bit older, he begins trying to win a mare of his own. The stallion Medicine Hat did not appreciate his efforts, especially since he had just very recently won a mare for himself. And I watched Medicine Hat chase Tecumseh back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until the younger stallion finally, reluctantly, moved away. In the spring of 2009, a fateful year for the McCullough Peaks herd, Tecumseh finally succeeds in winning a family for himself. That summer, I had no luck spending any time near them, as Tecumseh was very nervous about holding on to his family, and spent time outside his normal territory, away from the other bands. Tecumseh's new family consisted of Pistol, Ruger, Winchester, Tradebead, and Little Medicine. But 2009 was memorable for another reason. The BLM had issued a scoping document for removing horses with a helicopter from McCullough Peaks herd in October, with a plan to give mares the birth control drug PZP and skew the sex ratio of the herd, leaving 60 stallions for every 40 mares. During the roundup, no attempt was made to keep the families of wild horses together. As the horses entered the trap, stallions were separated from mares, foals were separated from their mothers. The lucky stallions chosen to remain were released, and the mares that were to be released were treated with PZP and also released. To spread the horses more evenly across the horse range, horses were released in many different areas of the herd area. When I returned in summer 2010, I was astonished to see that Tecumseh had won back 2 of his mares and an old childhood band member, Legend. Despite being small in stature and only 6 years old, Tecumseh had a family again, when older and bigger and more experienced stallions such as Washakie, Warbonnet, and Indigo, who had had huge families before the roundup, were alone and fighting over mares. He also had 2 new adorable pinto foals, Taurus, a filly, and Savage, a colt. Things were not at all smooth sailing for the young stallion. However, I watched as a group of 5 families rested in the morning, and around them 10 stallions looking for opportunity circled the families like sharks. Periodically, there were scuffles and fights, and the atmosphere was very tense. Normally, in a herd of wild horses, the sex ratio is approximately 50% mares and 50% stallions. This new skewed dynamic had not been studied by the BLM to determine the impact it might have on the social structure of the herd. I watched it cause a lot of strife and injuries, and some mares that were exhausted from being chased. The effect on young foals could not have been good. In the next 2 years, some of the former band stallions won small families again, such as Indigo, Washakie, and Medicine Hat. There were still many more bachelor stallions than usual. After the roundup in 2009, the local group Friends of a Legacy began working with the wild horse and burro specialist in the Cody BLM office in 2011 to use the 1-year PZP birth control drug to keep the herd numbers in check. Their common goal? No more helicopter roundups. BLM staff and members of foal are out each January and February darting the mares. 2011 was the last year that there were many foals in the spring, and one of my very favorites is Tonkawa, the last surviving foal of Tradebead. His outgoing personality and striking looks, a pinna with a lot of white with his 2 blue eyes, he looks very similar to his dad Tecumseh. In January 2012, the BLM determined that the herd was over the appropriate management level, and so this time, the BLM used bait trapping to remove a small number of young horses. This method of capturing wild horses using the bait of hay and horse treats is far more humane and less disruptive to the horses. They are not driven for miles and frightened by helicopters, and their families remain intact. There are also far fewer injuries. I was hugely relieved to find out that Tonkawa was left on the range. I'm certain that this young stallion will make a wonderful band stallion as he grows up. One April, I was watching Tecumseh's band and noticed that he seemed on edge and kept moving his family around. This was not characteristic behavior, as Tecumseh is usually a rather laid back and curious about visitors near his family. I was enjoying the antics of Tonkawa and his younger brother Rebel, and thinking that this will probably be the last time I see Tonkawa with Tecumseh's family, since he was now of an age to go out on his own. Little did I know it would also be the last time I saw Tecumseh with his family. I found out that a week after I left, Tecumseh had been injured and lost his family to Mesquite, a big black stallion, a year younger and probably 200 to 300 pounds heavier than Tecumseh. No one could find Tecumseh. I was very concerned and hoped that he would survive. When I went back to the herd area in June, I was able to find Tecumseh's former family in the gorgeous dawn light at a waterhole led by Mesquite. The girls were clearly not happy about this change in leadership. I saw Gentle Legend, clearly unhappy, kicking at the other mares as Mesquite drove them assertively one way and another. Micromanagement was not popular with the mares, but Mesquite clearly felt he needed to solidify his position. Not only Tonkawa, but also Rebel was missing, clearly having been kicked out by Mesquite. As I drove over the hill, I was thrilled to find Tecumseh. He looked battered and was limping heavily with a big front knee, but he was alive and staying near his former family. I had hopes that he would recover and win them back, and that February I drove up to the herd area in the snow, hoping to be able to photograph some of the horses in the snow if I could get out on the roads without getting mired in a snowdrift. The first morning I found Tecumseh, and he was with his sons, Tonkawa and Rebel. I was so happy to see the three of them together. And best of all, Tecumseh looked fully recovered, no limp, running easily. Nearby, I also saw Mesquite and the family. The mares looked very settled with him now, and I think it's unlikely that Tecumseh could win them back from the much bigger stallion. It was sad not to see Trade Bead. The older mare had passed away over the summer, and she'll be sorely missed. The next year, there were 4 foals that survived in the entire McCullough Peaks herd area. Even if you find the use of the 1-year PZP for birth control controversial, consider this fact. The McCullough Peaks herd is one of the only herds that was not being targeted by the state of Wyoming and the BLM for helicopter roundups and removal that summer. For that, I am very grateful. Since then, when I found Tecumseh, he would be on his own or hanging out with his sons or other older stallions. The last time I saw him was in the summer of 2022. He was in good spirits, calling out to the horses in the big group as he grazed nearby. He disappeared over the winter of 2022. He, like Shaman, lived his entire life wild and free. Things have changed in his herd. The BLM did a bait trapping roundup this last year and removed 40 horses from the range, despite the fact that it's such a small herd with an aging population, and despite the successful use of PZP birth control, having been used for over 13 years to control the size of the herd. The use of birth control now seems to be no longer enough for the BLM. They want to remove horses no matter how small the herd, no matter how little the herd is over appropriate management level. There are some horses who seem larger than life. The stories I know about 2 stallions in sister herds, as Ginger Catherines calls them, the Pryor Mountain herd and the McCullough Peaks herd, can give you a window into the lives of wild horses. All our wild horses on public lands are special in their own way. Each has their own lives, relationships, and contribution to their herd and to the land they live upon, and are an integral part of. Our wild horses need to be preserved and cherished for their unique personalities and lives, and anything we can do to help them keep them wild and free is necessary and essential. As Henry David Thoreau said, "In wildness is the preservation of the world." Thank you for listening to this episode of Freedom for Wild Horses. If you'd like more information about what you can do to help keep America's wild horses wild and free, visit my website, www.wildhoofbeats.com. Thank you for listening to this episode of Freedom for Wild Horses. If you want to learn more, follow me at www.wildhoofbeats.com for more information and for ways to help America's wild horses. See you next time.